this month called Happy Even After. We all grew up on the fairy tales, didn't we? Now, granted, they changed as we grew older, but we grew up with Cinderella, Rapunzel, Snow White, Princess and the Pea. We knew them all, okay? If you grew up at the time frame I did, and I'm sure they're still going on, we grew up with the fairy tales, and in fact, we kind of almost believed it a little bit that one day you would find your handsome prince or you would find your beautiful princess and you would fall in love and you would live happily ever after. Now, I didn't say that. Rusty said that. Okay. Now, Pat, if you're watching out there, I did not say that. But something happened. We realized that there's a gap between what we don't know. And by the way, Hallmark is great with this, and we all love Hallmark. Okay, not all of us love Hallmark, but a lot of us love Hallmark because it gives us that predictable storyline. Boy meets girl, girl meets boy, fall in love, and live happily ever after. But there's a difference between the falling in love stage and the trying to stay in love stage, isn't there? Responsibilities happen. Real life happens. The sunglasses, the rose-tinted glasses seem to change color. I don't know. Something happens. And the reality is, as we know this, is that for too many of us, that happily ever after becomes too hard. And we kind of assume that we did not find the right prince or we did not find the right princess, and so we kind of need to do what? Try again. And we know this because today 50% of all marriages end in divorce. The problem is that we know, according to statistics, is that it doesn't get better with the second one. In fact, it's something like 62, 63%. And it doesn't get better with the third because 70-some% of third marriages end in divorce. Because there is a distinct difference between falling in love and staying in love. But I believe as followers of Jesus Christ, we can live, in fact, we're called to live happy even after, even when there is not a happy ever after. Anyone in here like to go on hikes? Okay. If you've ever been on a hike where you go down into the canyons, you ever been in a hike where you've been, I don't know, there's not many of those around this part of the world, but if you've ever been out where you've been able to hike down between a canyon and you get right down the bottom and you got these big cliff faces up on both sides, there's something childish in me that just yearns to do something. What is it? Okay, you know it. You cannot help yourself. You've got to simply go, hello. Okay, I may be a little childish. I've got to admit, it happens. But there's something absolutely thrilling about hearing your voice come back to you. There's something unique about being able to say something, and from somewhere out in the distance, it comes back in all of its glory. We all love a good echo. In fact, can I just say this? I'm not just talking about when we walk through the canyon and we shout out, okay? Or when you get into a good building, when this building is empty and you remove the chairs in here, this building's got a pretty good little echo through it. But we all love a good echo, and I'm not talking about the kind of just hearing your voice bounce off the walls. I'm talking about that place where we like to gather people around us who do what? Think like us, talk like us, act like us. We build friendships based upon people who like to do the same things we do. If you like football, you prefer to find someone who likes football, who likes either college or pro in a certain team for some reason. If you like coffee, okay, this is my thing. You enjoy going out and having a good coffee with someone who enjoys coffee. If you like, and we could fill in the gap, couldn't we? We like to surround ourselves with people who think like us, who act like us, and in a sense, repeat back the things we already think. I always love being around people who have good common sense like I do. And you do too. When you decided to marry your spouse, most of us thought we found somebody who saw life the same way we did through our own lens, didn't we? We thought it was going to be easy to stay in love happily ever after because we thought we found somebody who was going to echo our thoughts and our opinions. Yet something scary happened when one day you woke up and they did not echo your thoughts and your opinions. I want to just kind of put a little line here. So just hold on to that for a second, and let's just kind of put a little line, and let's kind of go back. We've so far stated that as we get married, God made marriage for a purpose, and the purpose is that two distinct individuals come together and learn to do life in a common direction. Now, when you get two distinct people coming together, it is not easy to do life in a common direction. And in order to be able to do this, we began to talk about there's two things that are required to go in a common direction: love and respect. But here's the reality. Two common people or two distinct people coming together, trying to go in a common direction, even when they have love and respect for each other, there are times when we do not echo each other, and there gets to be I hate to use this word, conflict, a difference of opinion, a different way to see life. There are times when you find when you say something and your spouse does not echo it back, and you go, what are you thinking? We married each other because we were supposed to echo each other. Now, we don't think that. We didn't say that, but we kind of assumed that. The problem that we all know is that when we have two distinct people trying to come together to do life in one direction, and they have two strong opinions going in two different directions, what do we end up with? Conflict. We end up with things pulling apart, not coming together. Now, I got to be honest with you, almost all of us in here, and I am the first one to put my hand up, I hate conflict. We know that conflict can lead to bad things. Now, I'm just going to talk to those of us who are married for a moment. If you're not married at the moment, you can just go, I know there was a reason why I didn't do that. Okay, just bear with me. But for those of us who have at times, who are married, and we found ourselves at that moment when our spouse did not echo our opinion or our thought or our desire back, and we found ourselves butting heads, we're going, this is not right, it's not fair, and we find ourselves in that conflict where we begin to clench our fists. Okay, nobody does this, I'm sure. We're all Christians in here. Our heartbeat races a little bit faster. Our voice goes a couple tones higher. Our pitch even changed. By the way, when I start getting frustrated, I try to concentrate on lowering the pitch of my voice so I sound more, because otherwise I start getting more. Okay. Some of you guys don't do that. Some of you guys will just walk away from. You know, in order to avoid the conflict and the problem arises, you just go, I'm not dealing with this, and walk away from. Sometimes you find a door gets slammed. And even worse, you find yourself saying something you would never have said. Why does it start to happen? I've got to be honest. If you have been married for more than 2 weeks, you will have begun to experience this reality. By the way, that part where you feel madly in love with, we already dealt with this idea. The reality is that only lasts on average between 6 months to 18 months. That moment of feeling deeply giddy and this is so wonderful only lasts a very short time, and then reality sets in, and it's a good thing it sets in because you've got to pay the bills. But when the reality sets in and we begin to deal with this conflict and things are not being echoed back the way we thought they should be echoed back, we begin to struggle. And by the way, this kind of conflict happens, and there's basically a couple reasons why it happens. Is number one, it happens because you begin to feel disrespected. Isn't that partly what happens? I don't feel heard. You're not listening. Number two, we begin to feel like we're being manipulated or bullied into doing something we don't want to do. And so we begin to deal with this conflict that begins to rise, and that echo is not coming back because you are trying to harass me into doing what I don't want to do. Number three, we get feeling this kind of bad conflict because we feel like I have lost control of my life. Doesn't that what marriage does sometimes? We thought we were going into an echo chamber, and what we find out is we actually have two distinct people who have two distinct ideas. And even though we desire to go in a common direction, sometimes we cannot get onto the same page. When we allow this kind of conflict to come into our lives, I guarantee you one thing. This kind of conflict always tears apart. This kind of conflict does not build relationships. And we all know because we have all been there at some point in our life. Yet here's the truth. Conflict itself is not the problem. It is how you respond in that moment. You did not get married to have an echo. I want to just say this. As we read through the Bible, we're told that actually conflict is not just going to happen, but in fact, conflict is healthy. Now, did I say that? Okay. You know conflict is coming. Solomon said this, man is few days and full of trouble, okay? That means man is just going, hey, you will deal with conflict. I heard one guy say, he'd been married for like 30 some years, and he said, my wife and I, we've never fought. And I thought one of two things. You are either the biggest liar I know, or you are an extreme bully. Because two different people cannot always think the same thing. We are told, though, that conflict itself is not the problem. It's how you respond. In fact, Solomon begins to tell us that conflict is actually healthy and will improve your relationships. Okay, I know. Just bear with me for a little bit. We're going to start this morning, and we're going to start by Solomon telling us in Proverbs chapter 27, and you know this verse, so just kind of bear with me. We're going to put it up here. Proverbs chapter 27, verse 6. Solomon writes, and he says this: wounds from a sincere friend are better than many kisses from an enemy. What is he saying? There are going to be times when you are going to see things differently to someone that you are in deep relationship with. It is better that someone disagree with you publicly who loves you than that they simply, okay, whatever you want, dear. In fact, just a little bit farther on in Proverbs chapter 27, verse 17, so a few verses down, he goes on to say this: as iron sharpens iron, so a friend sharpens a friend. Solomon is dealing with this idea that the reality is that when there are two people together, they are not always going to see things on the same page. And the reality is that we need conflict because every once in a while, I don't see things right. As much as I think I have the best common sense in the world, you know what I found out? Sometimes my wife is right. Now, let me take that back. I have found that my wife is almost always right. Solomon starts with this idea and says, you need to understand this. Hey, you need someone into your life who will talk to you honestly. Solomon goes on and he begins to say this: not only does this someone coming in and speaking to our life makes us stronger, sharpens us, makes us stronger, but he goes on to say this. Let's go back to Proverbs chapter 12, verse 15. Solomon says this: fools think that their own way is right, but the wise listen to others. As much as we want to always have someone tell us the same thing that we think, to feel the same things that we feel, to want to do the things that we do, Solomon says this way will only lead to harm. We need someone with other thoughts and opinions to speak into our life. In Proverbs chapter 13, verse 10, he goes on to say this: pride leads to conflict, and this is the kind of conflict which is not good. But those who will take advice are wise. Solomon is reminding us that if we allow conflict in a right way into our life, it can help us grow stronger and learn things we never knew before. I know that I married someone that I thought was going to think like me. Now, I would never have told you this when I got married, but I just assumed that when I married my wife, she was going to echo back my thoughts and my opinions. I would never have said that. In fact, I just simply thought of it like this: I can't believe I found someone who loves doing the exact same things that I love to do. She loves the same music. She enjoys the same movies. She loves my jokes. I knew that my wife was the person for me. But there was something that someone forgot to tell me. She doesn't like all the same movies that I like. She doesn't enjoy all the same music I enjoy. She doesn't think all my jokes are as funny as I thought she thought they were. And all of a sudden, I realized, I'm not sure what day it was, but it wasn't that long, that my wife did not echo back all my thoughts and opinions. For some of you, you know what I mean. There's a reality that we can be deeply in love with someone who sees life differently than we do. For many people, we don't realize this until after we're married. We see faith in a different way. We see common directions of how do we treat family in a different way. There are so many differences that sometimes we said, but I didn't even know that. Does this mean that we married the wrong person? No. This means we need to learn and to figure out how do we allow conflict to come into our lives that helps us to get on the same page. By the way, I believe marriage is worth fighting for, not over. All right? So bear with me real quick. I believe that marriage, your relationship with your spouse, is worth fighting for. If you're going to make your marriage work, you're going to have to learn how to fight right. Okay. Now, let me just say real quickly, as we begin to go down here, we're not going to solve all of the problems that we deal with in conflict in this next few minutes. But what I want to do is to begin to give you some keys that will help and go, if I can just begin to plug some things into my life, we can begin to remove some of the heat, okay? Marriages are complicated. People are complicated. You may not have realized that by now. But when you got married, you married someone who has a different history and a different past. You have a different history and a different past. And when you got married, you brought two different histories and two different pasts together. And sometimes there's a little bit of grading that goes on. So, if we're going to fight for our marriages instead of fight in our marriages, we're going to have to learn how to do conflict right. I'm going to give three things. And by the way, we're not trying to say this is going to solve all the problems of the world. But I am going to say this. If you can begin to just hold on to these three things, when it begins to happen, when the conflict begins to heat up, I want you to kind of pull out these three things. If you need to write them down, need to put them in the back of your memory, remember these three things. Number one, learn to identify the problem. And that is not your spouse, okay? Too often, we begin to see our spouse as the problem, and no, they are not. The reality is that the problems we need to find go down to sometimes into our past, goes into the way that we see life, goes into the way that we are feeling right now. When we begin to feel disrespected and unheard, when we're beginning to feel bullied and manipulated, when we're beginning to feel like I have lost control, bad conflict happens. You need to be aware of it. Where is the problem? When this thing happens in my life, what is the problem? This comes to a place of learning how to talk without blaming. okay, I don't know if I can do this. This is really tough. But I do know that this is something that I have constantly have had to try to continue to learn and continue to this day to not allow myself to get into. How do you begin to discuss a problem without blaming someone for it? Can I just say this? A good way to start doing this is to remove words always and never out of that conversation. When you begin to say you always, you never, guess what we've done? We've begun to blame the person as opposed to identify the problem. The problem is usually with how I'm feeling. I'm feeling out of control. I feel like you're manipulating me. I feel like I'm being bullied. I feel like I can't hear, you're not hearing me. When we begin to try to identify the problem, it's important that you begin to realize that. It is better to say something like, I feel like you are, like I have lost control when you do this. And then follow it up with another question, such as, is there something that I am doing or that is going on that is causing? It's easy to talk about this, by the way, on Sunday morning. But to be able to pull out and to get to what is the root of the problem and not look at the person as a problem is not an easy thing. We were not made for an echo chamber. We need to hear where other people are coming from. And they need to hear where we are coming from. Find the problem. Okay, I'm going to move on real quickly. Number 2, if we're going to begin to have conflict in the right way, we need to be clear on our common purpose. What is it that we both want in this area? What is causing the problem? Well, you always, whenever I try to speak, I just can't hear because you try to fill in my thoughts for me. Okay, that's my problem. I do that. Here's what you're thinking. Okay, you guys, if you're a little ADD like I am, you guys understand this. Some of you guys know what I'm talking about. When your brain works faster than your mouth, and your mouth is working as fast, okay, you know what I'm talking about. When someone else tries to say something, what do we tend to do? We fill in the blanks for them. Let me tell you what you're thinking, and here's what your solution is. We need to, number 1, identify the problem, remind ourselves of what is our common purpose. We need to hear each other. What is our common purpose? We disagree on something. What's our common purpose? What, in this area, what is our common goal? How do we stop and remind ourselves of what we both want? We both want to feel loved and respected. We want to feel heard. We do not want to feel manipulated or bullied into doing something. How do we get to this place? What is our common goal? So number 1, be clear on what the problem is. Don't turn it into the person. Number 2, what is our common goal? And number 3, we're just going to be real quick because we're coming to the end. How do we get there? This sounds so simple, and we already know these things. You guys know this, but we struggle to implement it within our marriages. What is the common plan? How do we get there? We'll take 5 minutes to talk each. You have your 5 minutes, I'll have 5 minutes. You need another 5 minutes, I'll take another 5 minutes. Whatever is the plan. Set up a plan. The reality is this, is it doesn't do us any good to know what the problem is. It doesn't even do us any good to know, hey, what is our common goal? If we don't come up with a plan to get onto the same page, it is for nothing. There is a simplicity in what we know. But I guarantee you this, if you can begin to start here, you can begin to take some of the heat out of the conflicts that we face. Conflict is not the problem. In fact, conflict is good because it allows us to hear something from someone else's perspective. If you knew it all, you would be sitting on the throne next to God. But you don't, and neither do I. Conflict is good because it allows us to hear a different perspective. It forces us to sit and listen and to communicate and to try to come up with a solution that helps us to get on the same page. Where there is no conflict, there is someone who is being manipulated. Where there is no conflict, then someone is being controlled. Where there is no conflict, then someone is being unheard. And that is not healthy. Look, I'm going to just make this clear one more time. We are not going to solve all marriage problems and reduce all the heat out of conflicts that we have in this quick 30-minute talk. But as followers of Jesus Christ, we are called into relationships. And by the way, there's a reason why you fell in love with your spouse. They're worth fighting for, not fighting over. So, let's do this. Let's fight right.